If that happens, then the client is essentially going to get nothing out of their settlement, even if we got them the maximum insurance amount of policy available. You've been through enough. This is Now What? Your guide to recovering after life blindsides you. I'm Jordan Travis, a personal injury attorney here in Colorado. And together we'll cut through the confusion, expose the insurance games, and let you get the clarity you deserve. Welcome back to episode 3 of Now What, a podcast for injured people in Colorado. I am Jordan Travis. I'm a plaintiff attorney in Colorado. I'm also a part owner and partner at Travis Legal Offices in Castle Rock, Colorado. Today, I want to talk about what insurance limits are. It's a topic that comes up routinely in almost every case we deal with very early on. Sometimes we have to deal with it later as well. But insurance limits are something that often confuses people and other attorneys as well about what limits apply, what they even are, and then how do we use them in our cases to maximize the recovery that clients get. So the first type of limit that applies in any auto accident case and an insurance limit in general, let me start there. An insurance limit, what it is a maximum amount that an insurance company is obligated to pay under their contract with the insured, whoever that is. And we'll get into the differences between first party, which is your own insurance, and third party, which is someone else's insurance that you're trying to access. So there are different types of insurance, but each one of them, no matter which type you use, has an applicable limit on it. The higher the limit, usually the higher the premiums per month, whoever is being insured is paying out to the insurance company per month to get those higher limits. A limit in general is what it sounds like. It is a maximum policy for a specific type of coverage that will apply. So, in the most common circumstance that will apply to most cases we deal with, there are coverages called liability limits. Liability just means when you're at fault or someone is at fault for an accident, you are liable for those damages. And liability limits in our practice, how we use it for car accident victims and injuries, liability limits cover certain types of damages. The main one that they cover is, and actually gets broken out into two parts. There's property damage liability limits. In the state of Colorado, the minimum insurance limits for property damage that anyone has to carry who's licensed or is licensed and has a driver's license in Colorado, the minimum that they have to carry for property damage, that's damage to your car, that's damage to any items in your car. Again, it is what it sounds like. It's property that you own. The minimum in Colorado is $15,000. It can go a lot higher than that. Obviously, people can and do cause accidents that result in a lot more damages than that. So in order to protect their assets and their own money, instead of having to pay out of pocket, people buy insurance. And that's what the property damage portion of the coverage and policy applies. You can also optionally get your own property damage coverage under your own policy. So if someone hits you and they only have a certain amount of limits, let's say it's for property damage, let's say it's $15,000, a state minimum, which a lot of people only have that amount. In that scenario, if your car is worth, let's say $50,000 and it's totaled, the $15,000 isn't going to be enough to cover the $50,000 car, obviously. And people generally don't have enough money to cover the difference between what your total damages are and what their liability limits are. Meaning, frankly, if your car is worth $50,000, even if it is worth that much, if the person who hit you only has a certain amount of limits, and let's say, again, it's $15,000, they probably don't have enough money to cover that $35,000 difference. Even if you were to sue them, take them to court, go all the way to trial, you won't be able to actually get that $35,000 out of them. So that is why it is advisable, and many of our clients, and we recommend it to anyone who calls us, it is advisable to protect yourself by getting first party property damage coverage and other coverages that apply to that as well. But first party means you protect yourself from anyone who hits you or if you cause an accident. So again, in this scenario that we're running with of You own a $50,000 car, someone totals it, they only have 15,000, which is a state minimum. In that scenario, you could go through your own insurance if you had it, this optional coverage of first party property damage up to a certain limit. And it makes sense to carry limits for property damage up to the total value of your vehicle. In particular, because again, I'm playing with 15,000 as a state minimum, that there are a lot of drivers who are uninsured entirely, don't have any insurance on their cars, or if it's a hit and run scenario and you don't know who is at fault, can't identify them, no one can do it. Often it's very difficult to identify hit and run drivers despite all the cameras and everything's around. It's just very difficult. Even if you got a license plate, trying to identify the driver itself is very difficult. So that is why we recommend if you have a car that's worth $50,000, you carry at least $50,000 of first party property damage insurance limits. That covers generally what property damage limits are. Again, it's for property in your car. If you carry, as a second note, if you do carry some sort of specialized item transported in your vehicle, such as rocks and minerals or something valuable that is used, whether it's for business purposes or otherwise, you may want to carry additional property damage coverage because personal property is only covered in the property damage itself. So for example, if you have a $50,000 car and you have $10,000 worth of goods, whatever they are in the back of your car, and your car is totaled as well as the property is damaged inside of it, that will be a problem. So you want to carry enough limits, not only for the value of the car, but for whatever you're transporting as well, just in terms of property. Then there's another type of limits, and this is the most commonly accessed one specifically for injuries. There's on any deck page or declaration page in Colorado, when they issue insurance, whether it's State Farm, Progressive, Geico, they're all used to have their own versions of a declarations page. It will list out a coverage called bodily injury liability limits. What that means, and we'll break it, it is what it sounds like. It's for bodily injury and liability. So it covers, if that is the most standard type of policy, it covers if you as a driver hurt someone else, how much protection do you have for your assets if that someone else were to sue you? In the state of Colorado, the minimum for bodily injury liability limits are $25,000. So in our practice and our experience, a lot of people have that coverage because it's the cheapest, it's the state minimum. And where we run into issues more than anything, if someone causes an accident and hurts our client, so does cause bodily injury, they're at fault for it. They're liable for the damages. But if they only carry up to the $25,000 limits minimum limits that you have to have, the insurance company for that at-fault party, no matter how badly hurt your client is or our client or anyone is, they will only pay the $25,000 per person for those damages. So a lot of people get in really bad car accidents. We've seen it all the way from people being in the ICU and having to be transported by ambulance or helicopter. And in those scenarios, if the person who caused the accident, if it's an individual person and they carry the state minimum, the most their insurance is going to pay is $25,000 per person. That's what the limit is. There are some extenuating circumstances to that as well. On the deck page, there is a slash. So it says bodily injury liability limits, and then it'll say a number, 25,000 is the minimum, and then it'll say slash and give you a different number. And what that second number is, and sometimes it defines it, sometimes it doesn't, but what it is really, and if you actually read through the policy, it is per accident coverage. So this gets a little tricky in certain cases where, for example, normally they would have to pay out $25,000, like I just said, per person who's injured in an accident. But that slash means per accident. So no matter how many people are involved, let's say the person who caused the accident hits a car that contains 4 passengers inside. Well, that slash means that is essentially the maximum, no matter how many people are involved, that they're going to pay out. So instead of doing 25 times 4, which would be $100,000, the slash means we're only going to pay out 50,000 and you guys have to divide it between all 4 people involved. In fact, we have a case like that right now that is a significant issue, is we represent multiple people and who were damaged inside a vehicle. Their vehicle actually flipped and rolled. And in that case, the person who caused the accident carries a minimum bodily injury liability limit of 25,000 per person and then 50,000 per accident. Well, that 50,000 has to be divided by all of our clients. So though that explains what a bodily injury liability limit is when you look at it on your declarations page, as it relates to, again, liability coverage. There is a different type of coverage. Again, it's optional in the state of Colorado, but we recommend it, and it's very important for clients to protect yourself. So if you're hit by someone who doesn't have enough insurance, basically causes more damage than what insurance would cover, or doesn't have insurance at all, hit and run, again, those type of scenarios, you can't find it or they just don't have it, then there is a coverage called underinsured or uninsured motorist. It stands for the acronym is UM/UIM coverage. That protects yourself in case someone else hits you and doesn't have enough coverage. In my head, the way it works is there is the bodily injury liability limit of whoever causes the accident. That is one bucket of insurance. No matter, it can be a big bucket, it can be a small one, and it often is a small one, but that is the bucket of insurance for the person who hit you. If that's not enough, and essentially you're filling it up and your damages flow over that bucket, you can basically purchase a second bucket to catch all the excess damages, or water, however you want to think of it, the excess damages in your own second bucket, but it's optional. So some clients don't have that second bucket on their coverage because it is a optional coverage that you don't technically and legally have to pay for. The problem for people who don't pay for it is that if you're hurt by someone who doesn't have enough in their own first bucket and you don't have a second one for yourself, you don't have this UM/UIM coverage, in those scenarios, you're out of luck. Essentially, there will not be enough insurance coverage to apply to your case. So this is something that comes up in quite a bit of our cases, is the negotiation, or just the understanding of what are the limits that are available. How much does the person who caused the accident have in terms of their own liability limits? How much do they have in property liability? And then how much does our client have in first party property damage coverage and first party UM/UIM coverage? The last thing I'll mention, as far as just generally the different types of limits, there are other optional coverages as well that, again, protect yourself. The first one would be medical payments coverage in Colorado. If you opt into that, it would cover first party. So anytime you're hurt by anyone else, the minimum, if you add that on, is $5,000 on medical payments coverage. It is a very good coverage to have because it stacks on top of the UM/UIM coverage, which is often a little bit different to access. MedPay applies no matter what to cover your bills. The UM/UIM is a lot. You have to show certain things in order to access UM/UIM coverage, and that's where we'd recommend consulting with an attorney. The biggest type of coverage you can apply, or the one that provides the most options and most coverage available, is called an umbrella policy. So an umbrella policy stacks on top of whatever policies already apply. So for example, if our client got hit by someone who had their own who has insurance, that person who caused the accident only has $25,000 in limits. Our client has their own limits for UM/UIM, but then our client also has an umbrella policy. We may be able to access 2 policies under our client, the first one being UM/UIM, the second one being umbrella. So in that scenario, there's actually 3 tiers of buckets of insurance. And again, each case is different. Who caused the accident, what the limits are, what the minimums are, all those type of things change from case to case. Because, for example, if a truck causes a collision, the state minimum goes from like a semi-truck, anything over 26,000 pounds, the state minimum goes from $25,000 to $750,000 if it is a semi-truck. If a semi is transporting hazardous materials, it goes to $5 million in coverage as a minimum. Either way, there are a lot of things that go into investigating how much limits are available. And realistically, in order to assess the full value of the case, you need to know what the limits are. And the only way to do that, because there are different insurance policies that may apply, which is going to be the next big topic that I get into here in a second, is investigating how many policies apply. So how do you find out the limits, and how do you find out how many policies apply? Those are two things that our office does immediately every time we take in a case. Oftentimes people call us, and in fact, I met with someone this week that they were dealing with a case with an insurance company of someone who caused an accident. That insurance company would not tell our clients the amount of the limits for over a year. Clients asked for it. The insurance company just would refuse to do so. So those are scenarios, real world scenarios, where insurance companies will not tell you what the limits are if you're just doing it yourself. You have to go through a certain specific process in order to legally acquire the limits and force them to disclose it. Our office specializes in that. And I'll tell you so you can follow yourself if you need to, or you have the ability. There's a statute in the state of Colorado, a law that is the acronym, or the number for it is Colorado Revised Statute 10.3.1117. So 10.3.1117. And what that does is, if you send a certified letter to a specific agent designated by the insurance companies, you can acquire the information as it relates to the policies that apply and their limits if you tell them that you're investigating a claim for injured people. So again, you have to send it to a specific place. Each insurance company has a different address. You have to send it certified mail, so it can't just be regular mail, in order to verify that they received it. And then they have 30 days upon receipt of that specific letter to send you a complete copy of the primary policy and any excess policies that apply for the person who caused this collision. So it could be a scenario where the person who caused it has multiple policies. And in that scenario, such as umbrellas, that they have their own first and second bucket. In that scenario, they are obligated to give you both policies if you send the letter the proper way. But there's quite a bit of investigation and follow-up that needs to go into that to make sure they do the right thing. In the event that an insurance company does not provide the policy information to you and the limits after you correctly requested under 10.3.1117, they are obligated to pay a penalty of $100 per day for each day that they are late or haven't complied with the statute. Our office has litigated those cases before where they've hidden policies or not disclosed them on time. There are limits to how much they will pay out. For example, any lawsuit regarding a violation of the limits, we would recommend be filed within a year. So up $100 a day times 365 days is basically their maximum exposure on that is $36,500 in penalties that they could pay just for them not telling you what their limits are. And in many cases, they paid, I've heard of them paying up to that. Our office, we're usually more aggressive so that we don't let them get quite that high. But we've gotten many cases done in the tens of thousands of dollars just for them not giving us the policy information on time. And that has nothing to do with the injuries. It's a separate case, separate lawsuit, just about them hiding limits. So in addition to that, how an attorney would also help you if you're injured or have questions about limits is there are optional other coverages that could apply in the household. But more than that is, if someone who causes the accident lives with anyone else, there may be a coverage called resident relative coverage. So even if the person who causes the accident is not specifically listed on the policy, if they live with someone who does have insurance, even if that person doesn't have the insurance for the person who caused the accident again, you may be able to access the resident relative policies, not just the at-fault party. There are certain circumstances where that doesn't apply, and again, frankly, if you're worried about that, you probably need to consult with an attorney about your case anyway. But that is something that comes up quite a bit is insurance companies will tell you what the driver who causes the accident's policy is, and they will not tell you who he or she lives with and what their policies are, which may apply. Actually, in fact, we have that happen almost in every case that they tell us it's only one policy in a household and there's multiple policies. So that is something that you need to investigate. Then you need to open up claims under the other policies and send out letters on those policies. Again, it can get very complicated very quickly. Just trying to find out how much insurance is available for someone to know essentially how much can our client get in order to compensate them. What is the maximum compensation under insurance that they would be able to obtain? There are a lot of cases where it may not be worth that much, up to what the limits are, but we need to know what the limits are either way, because it's an important fact in every case is to understand how much can the insurance company reasonably afford to pay and how much are they obligated to pay in a certain case before it's not their fault anymore and not their problem. It becomes the at-fault party. The last thing, a general topic that covers limits, and again, contact us if you have a question about limits in your case. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is why are limits important? So it impacts your case almost throughout the entire case. If you're injured, how much, what the limits are. And the reason being is if there's not enough coverage, you and your attorney and us or anyone else involved in the case needs to know if there's not enough. And that could be found out relatively quickly. Like if you go to the ICU, you go to the hospital and the hospital bill is above the limits, okay, you know there's not enough right away. But if you know you're not sure what the limits are and the client treats over a period of months or years, those medical bills obviously add up over time. And if you're not watching how much the medical bills are and know how much the limits are, you can't juggle those two. I don't want a client to ever treat with my knowledge over and above the maximum insurance limits available between all parties and all scenarios. Because if that happens, then the client is essentially going to get nothing out of their settlement. Even if we got them the maximum insurance amount of policy available, it will all go to the doctors who treated them, which may be the best thing in the case, but the client needs to be aware of it. That is the biggest thing, is it impacts any part of a case, because everyone needs to be informed of what the limits are, how much treatment that realistically affords them. And if it's not enough, then we can discuss options such as health insurance or private pay or liens and all sorts of other things that come into it. But there are ways to negotiate and deal with it around if there's not enough limits in a case. But you really need advice from an attorney then at that point if you're worried about limits not being enough to cover your injuries and damages. Because if you think they're not enough, they probably aren't enough. The other thing that limits impact and why we need to discover them relatively quickly in a case is again, as I was saying in the beginning, there's the first bucket of insurance will be the at-fault parties insurance. And then if it spills over, then it goes to the client's underinsured or uninsured motorists, that optional coverage that you can protect yourself for. Well, in order to access it, obviously you need to know that what the first party, what the at-fault party's limits are. You need to know how big that bucket is. If it's going to never fill up, if he or she has $2 million in coverage and it's never going to be an issue, cool, then you probably don't need to access that second bucket in that case. But if they only have, let's say, $25,000 in the first bucket and the client's really badly injured, then you know right away you need to set up a UIM claim with the second bucket. And that second bucket is important to know whether to set that up or not, because for even access the second one, you need to cooperate with an insurance company, because it is your own insurance company at that point protecting you, meaning you have a contract with them under a duty to cooperate to a reasonable degree anyway, is our argument. But either way, the contract does say you have a duty to cooperate with the with FL parties. Every contract says that, or I mean, with your own insurance. Every contract says that you have a duty to cooperate with your own insurance if you want to access your optional coverages. Again, I'll say it one more time, just for the sake of it. You have a duty to cooperate with your own insurance if you want to access optional coverages like underinsured or uninsured motorists. And in order to know whether you need to cooperate, you need to know what the limits are of the person who hit you, as well as your own insurance limits. And the last thing to wrap this up is there are certain scenarios where it makes sense to go through your own insurance for some damages and then the at-fault party for some damages. Kind of split it. It depends. We've seen it happen where the person who caused the accident doesn't carry enough injury limits, so you have to essentially go through your own insurance for that. But for some reason, they've added on their policy plenty of property damage limits. So in that case, you go through the at-fault party for the property damage, and then you go through your own insurance for the injury side of things, or vice versa. There are many different, each declaration page is unique as long as it meets the minimum standards. And there are standardized forms and that type of thing, but each declaration page can be modified depending on what that person who is trying to get insured wanted to purchase. So it is important to understand what limits are, what coverages apply, who's being covered, why they're being covered, early on in a case, in any scenario, because it can influence from start to finish how a case proceeds. That is my very basic, for purposes of today anyway, description of what insurance limits are, how they apply to auto, trucking, motorcycle, any of the cases that our office specializes in. And if you have a question or concern about them, please reach out to us. We'll talk to you about your case, or send you to someone who, wherever you're located, may be able to talk to you about your case specifically and the limits that apply. This is the Now What podcast. I'm Jordan Travis, and see you next time. If you're in Colorado and dealing with an accident or injury, reach out to us at Travis Legal Offices for your free consultation. You don't have to face this alone. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and remember, when life hits hard, you hit back.